as Brando said, I work in the labour market disadvantage team at the DWP. So we deal with policies around people, for example, who have addiction, who are homeless, ex-offenders, a lot of people who really do have difficulty engaging or re-engaging in the labour market. And obviously, times are challenging for everybody in terms of employment at the moment, particularly for people from those groups. But I'd like to talk to the title of our debate today, which is about encouraging entrepreneurship. And probably have to start with a confession that says, to be honest, I don't think DWP has a very good track record on helping people engage in entrepreneurial activities. We're a kind of great big sausage machine that processes people. In non-recessionary times, about 4 million people every year move from benefits into work. So it's a massive enterprise, and because it's a mass production business, we tend to focus on the needs of the many quite often, at the exclusion of the needs of the few. And the easiest thing to do, and what most people in fact are looking to do, is to move into paid employment with an employer. So I'm afraid to say that entrepreneurship has taken a background, sort of just a background enterprise with us. But I think things are beginning to change. I think politicians and officials are beginning to understand the value of encouraging entrepreneurship. I think there's an increasing realisation that disadvantage doesn't mean without hope. That there's a lot of people within the cohort that I have to deal with who do have skills that can be utilised. In fact, I was reading just this week a piece of research that shows that young people with high IQs are the group who are most likely to experiment with drugs. So you can see that within one of the hardest help groups, which are people with addictions, there will be a lot of people with a lot of skills and abilities if we can just help them to find a focus. And it's also clear that entrepreneurship has potential advantages for groups such as ex-addicts, ex-offenders, ethnic minorities, who face bias and discrimination in recruitment. I mean, we can't pretend that doesn't happen. In fact, my team did some research the year before last which proved that there is still significant bias in recruitment against people from ethnic minority backgrounds by sending identical application forms in different names to the same jobs. And it was very, very instructive. If you're going to work for yourself, then presumably your employer's not going to be biased against you. So it can be a really good route for people. So we are seeing some policies emerge. The new enterprise allowance was launched earlier this year, which gives support to people on benefits who are looking to move into entrepreneurship, and gives them cash and loans in order to support their enterprise. It's a small start, but I think it is indicative of a change of direction and on something on which we can build. But I think the other main point about this is that our sausage machine is unlikely to provide the answers for people with particular needs. However, we try to individualise our approach to people, which is one of the things the government's trying to do. And I think it's niche provision and organisations like the Small Business Consultancy that are going to always be a much better place to be able to provide the kind of service. And the government is obviously trying to move towards that because we don't have money to spend in the way that we had in the past. So through initiatives such as Big Society and social impact bonds, the government is looking at alternate ways of financing. What that means is that third sector organisations have to start thinking differently about how they leverage funding, because it's not going to be the same as it has in the past. And I think there are two key things in doing this. I think the first is around gathering concrete empirical evidence about the efficacy of interventions. It sounds fairly obvious, but actually a lot of organisations are quite bad at doing it, at least to a degree that's likely to satisfy the people who have their hands on the money. The first thing is to understand what the outcomes are that the government or the person that you're pitching to is interested in. In our area, lots of organisations say, I've got this wonderful scheme that helps people back into work. You say, okay, show us your evidence, and they say, look, I've got all these people, none of them actually got a job, but they've all moved closer to getting a job. And this is how I can show that I've done that. The government won't pay you for that. The government will only pay you for the outcome they want, and the outcome from my department now is somebody gets a job, because you actually can't measure that somebody is closer to a job until that point that they actually transit off for benefit. The second thing then is to actually prove that what you do works in the context of the outcome that we're prepared to pay for. And there are two real problems with that for a lot of schemes, particularly small local schemes. The first is called selection bias, and that is people will say, look, our programme works better than your national programme, therefore it should be funded, but our national programmes deal with everybody, and most local programmes have volunteers who enter the programme because they want help. So there's a selection bias there, because the biggest thing that stops people getting jobs is that they don't actually want to do it for themselves. Not all the other barriers that you can see that might prevent them, like addiction or like low education or whatever, people will overcome those if they really, really want to work. So selection bias is a huge problem for voluntary access programs. And so you have to show how, despite that, you're still successful. And the other is what our statisticians and analysts would call measuring the counterfactual, which is what did your program actually do, as opposed to what all of the other things that might impact on somebody did. And that again, in running national programs is hard, running small-scale programs is even more difficult, because externalities can have a big impact. So for example, you could have the best employment program that was ever invented, you launch it, and the major employer in your area goes bust. Suddenly, your program looks pretty poor. It might have been the greatest thing ever. At a national level, we can factor that out, but for smaller scale programs, it's hard. So measuring the actual impact of what you do is really important. And this becomes important when we look at things like big society and social impact bond initiatives, because you won't just be pitching to government, but also to business. So dealing with sort of hard-nosed businessmen and women and saying, I've got a program that works, fund it. You need that evidence in order to secure funding. The other thing in terms of what my department is doing, and increasingly what government will be doing, is moving away from funding services to paying for results. And our department's work programme is the biggest example of that so far. So in the past we would fund people to provide services for unemployed people in the kind of hope that they would work. The government doesn't do that anymore with work programmes. What it does is say, you do whatever you like with these people, but we're not going to pay you anything until you've got them in a job, and not only into a job, but they've sustained that job for a period of 6 months. And that's where most of the money that my department handles now goes. It goes through work programme providers. Now for niche providers who have got something they think that works, that has completely changed the way you have to deal with issues around funding. Firstly, it won't come from central government, because the money is owned and controlled by the people that run the work programme. The second is, and this may be good news, is it should in theory not require you to prove that what you do works, as long as you're prepared to accept the risk. The work programme has effectively shifted the risk from government to providers. And niche providers can do the same within the context of the work programme. So if you go to the work programme and say, I've got people who I know you can't help and you know can't help because they've got significant problems, I will take them off your hands because I think I've got something that I believe in and will work, and we share the outcome payment when I've achieved it. That sounds like a good bid to me. If I was a work programme provider, I'd take your hand off if you came to me with something like that, because I've got no cost involved, I've got no risk. If you're successful, I get some of the profit for basically doing nothing. So the whole way that people need to approach programs like this, I think, needs to change, and I think we'll need to think about how we can do that and engage better. So I think that would be my message, because in that way, organisations that I think if you talk to Emma, he is really convincing about how entrepreneurship can drive people, particularly I think people with addiction, where, to paraphrase what he said to me, we replace the addiction or illicit drugs with an addiction for work and entrepreneurship, and focus people down that route. So you take all of that energy and turn it from a negative into a positive. Organisations such as AMIS can achieve that, but I think everybody has to recognise we're in a different world, and we have to approach the whole process differently. And I hope that's been some help in understanding that.